Most people come to the spring quilt auction in Strasbourg for the craftsmanship. The mariner's stars stitched with such precision you could navigate by them. The appliqued tulips, bright enough to coax bees inside the pavilion. I went for a different reason. Chief Reuben Stoltzfus of the East Lampeter Township Police had phoned me at dawn, his voice fluttering like a swallow trapped behind glass. He'd never asked me, a county detective, for anything except spare change at a vending machine, but that morning he wanted me at an Amish auction before the first bid was called. Just observe, he said, and don't bring anybody else. The pavilion rose from the pasture like a timber ark. On the lawn outside, the usual hush of an Amish gathering reigned. Horses snuffling, wooden wheels ticking over gravel, the murmur of Pennsylvania Dutch. The auctioneer's dais was draped in bunting, and hanging next to it, seeming almost like a patriotic banner, was the quilt that would change the course of the next 24 hours. Squares in deep jewel tones formed a ring around a blank muslin centre. All of them were immaculate, but uneventful. Barn stars, sheaves of wheat, concentric hearts. At the far right, however, a single patch broke the symmetry. On it, a tiny log cabin burned, scarlet flames whipped halfway to the border. The stitches were flawless, but the image felt wrong, alarmingly specific, as if whoever had made it wanted to brand that scene on every retina. "What do you see?" Reuben asked. He stood at my elbow, wide-brimmed black hat in hand, grey beard trembling. "A house fire. Disturbing, yeah, but not illegal to embroider flames. Saying the quilt shop wasn't there yesterday," he whispered. "The quilt showed only patterns. Nothing like this. And there's more. The cabin looks exactly like Ely Fisher's place on Mill Creek Road. Same porch swing, same 2 chimneys." I pictured the Fisher farm, clapboard washed dull blue, a single maple guarding the yard. Eli raised dairy goats and sang bass in the Mennonite men's chorus. Nothing about him said arson risk. "Maybe coincidence," I said, though my pulse was quickening. "Who inspected the quilt overnight?" "No one. It hung in the firehouse office. After consignment check-in, locked door, boarded windows. I double-checked at 2 this morning. No deceitful patches." While Reuben spoke, the auctioneer mounted the dais, gavel polished to a walnut shine. "Friends, we begin in 1 hour," he announced. "Each 60 minutes will draw back the curtain to reveal the next square, until all 24 have shown themselves. Then we auction the full quilt for the benefit of Jonah Lapp's medical fund." A rustle of interest passed through the crowd. A square unveiled each hour like an advent calendar of fabric. Only Reuben and I knew the first window had revealed hellfire. "At 9 sharp," the auctioneer went on, "we uncover patch number 2. My watch read 8:45. "Come with me," Reuben said. We skirted the bidding tables, where baked goods and preserves scented the air. Beyond the pavilion, the pasture sloped to a pond, reflecting June clouds. Reuben stopped by a buggy whose curtains were drawn. "This quilt," he said, "was pieced by 12 Amish widows, 1 square each. But the center ring was left blank on purpose so additional squares could be attached with whip stitch during display. Some tourists suggested the reveal gimmick. Yesterday, all 12 finished panels were cheerful. Overnight, somebody substituted the fire square. Except Jonah's grandmother sat guard until midnight, and I watched the door till dawn. Then call it a prank," I said, "and warn Fisher to check his smoke alarms." Reuben's eyes were granite. "You think I asked you here for a prank?" "My niece Miriam sewed the mariner's compass square. She swore on her baptism the quilt was only beauty when she left it. Now you tell me why someone would risk trespass just to frighten the community." I didn't have an answer, so we waited, the bells of the old order church ringing 9. Back inside, the auctioneer tugged the muslin flap. A collective inhale fluttered kerchiefs like gull wings. Square 2 depicted a wooden bridge spanning a creek. In the foreground, a single buggy lay on its side, wheels shattered. Horses, stitched in frantic thread, bolted toward the margin, their harnesses dangling. A signpost on the bridge bore 3 embroidered letters. Bayar, short for Buyer's Bridge. A 1-lane span where kids carved initials. Somebody in the crowd cried out, "There looks like the buy place." Others traded anxious looks. The auctioneer lowered his gavel and asked for order, but the quiet never quite settled. An undercurrent of fear spread through rows of wooden benches. Reuben murmured, "I'm sending a unit to Buyer's Bridge." "I'll go," I volunteered. "If the quill's predicting mayhem, let's intercept it." As he radioed dispatch, I hurried to the rental car, more conspicuous than every buggy put together. The bridge was 5 miles east. When I arrived, the lane was empty, water glimmering between plank slats. But I noticed fresh grooves in the gravel, arcs of scrapes, metal rims where a buggy might have toppled. I searched the creek banks and found nothing but turtles. If anything had happened, it was long cleared. Back at the pavilion, the auction's order of interest had inverted. No one cared to bid. All eyes riveted the quilt. Women fanned themselves, though the day remained cool. Just before 10, a local volunteer unpinned another muslin sheet. Square 3 unfurled. An ear of golden corn bending under locusts. But in the center of the square, a black revolver lay amid the husks, muzzle smoking. Guns were forbidden in old order households. A weapon on an Amish quilt was as scandalous as a neon sign. I asked Reuben, "Cornfield robberies lately?" He shook his head. But Widow Reel owns the only cornfield tall enough to imitate that perspective. Her farm stand got robbed last autumn. $20 and a jar of jam. People began to leave, whispering about running errands, but I knew they were hurrying home to bolt doors. Amish don't bolt doors, yet I saw fear bending their rules. Those remaining formed prayer circles near the pavilion corners. The scent of shoe-fly pie soured into something metallic. Reuben conferred with the elders. They debated whether to stop the reveal. Some argued the quilt had become a warning oracle from God, others that it carried devil's work. Finally the bishop said, "We proceed. If it comes from above, we heed. If from below, we keep watch." A strange compromise. At 11, the next square showed an open safe, spilled cash curling in green whirls. The safe's combination dial was embroidered with 3 numbers. 318, Reuben swore softly. That's the combination to the Lancaster Savings Branch on Centre Street. Only managers know it. "Bank robbery prediction," I said. "We should post squads." We phoned the city chief. By the time noon struck, officers ringed Centre Street, but when the quilt square for noon emerged, cheeks drained whiter than muslin. It depicted not the bank, but a yellow school bus lying on its side against a sycamore. Windshield fractured like spiderweb. Children, tiny cross-stitched silhouettes, scrambled through shattered glass. I counted 13 outlines, same as the number of first graders riding Conestoga Elementary's rural route. "How accurate has the quilt been so far?" I asked, voice shaking. "The house fire hasn't happened." Reuben's gaze flicked across the pavilion, as if flames might blossom any second. "Nor the bridge accident." But signs suggested attempted trouble, I countered. Maybe our presence averted it. We decided to follow that hope and tail the yellow route. Deputy Laura King met me by the parking lot. She'd grown up plain, but joined law enforcement after leaving the Ordnung. She knew every farm lane by memory. We shadowed the bus from the moment it left school at 12:30, our cruiser 50 yards back. Past fields, past the dairy co-op, past Widow Reel's corn still only knee-high. No drunk driver appeared, no tire burst. The driver waved when he dropped the last child, oblivious to Providence. Square 6, unveiled at 1, revealed a placid river with an overturned canoe. 5, predicted crimes, none yet realized. Reuben's theory solidified. The quilt was a prophecy that could be thwarted by vigilance. "This changes everything," he said when I returned. "We have an ethical obligation to keep watching and intercept danger." We split tasks. Wildlife rangers inspected river bends, volunteers guarded Byers Bridge. The fire department perched at Eli Fisher's cabin with hoses primed. The Amish accepted these intrusions with solemn gratitude, their usual resistance to technology melting in the heat of augury. At 2, Square 7 displayed a scattering of smashed glass and a toppled beer bottle outside the County Historical Museum, an easy assignment. Officers patrolled the museum grounds. Docents locked display cases. No vandalism occurred. Square 8 at 3 showed a black sedan striking a bearded cyclist on Strasbourg Pike. I flagged a trooper. They stationed cruisers. The afternoon drowsed along, free of catastrophe. The quilt's threat had become a schedule. Each hour worry spiked, then subsided. By 4 p.m. townspeople treated it like a grim television program. Gather, gasp at the panel, disperse to neutralize it. News vans lined the pasture gate. Anchors speculated on Amish Nostradamus needlework, yet the deeper mystery remained. Who created these squares, and how did they attach themselves invisibly? The answer arrived with Square 12 at 6 p.m. Unlike the earlier squares, number 12 occupied the central blank, stealing all sunlight. It depicted, with photorealism embroidery, the very pavilion we stood in. Inside it, panic reigned. Benches overturned, quilts strewn, people fleeing. In a corner I recognized myself, small but unmistakably drawn in the grey suit I wore, kneeling over a figure sprawled on the floor. Reuben leaned close. "That figure is that Jonah Lapp." Jonah, the auction's beneficiary, lay homebound with kidney cancer. He hadn't left bed in months. But the stitched man on the floor bore a shock of blonde hair identical to his. "Why would Jonah come here?" I asked. "Maybe the square shows him injured somewhere else and you searching for evidence. It clearly shows this pavilion." I pointed to the bunting, mirrored in embroidery. Even the news vans were portrayed as tiny rectangles outside. Panic, once predicted, began to manifest. Parents corralled children, elders debated leaving, but the bishop lifted both hands. "Panic fulfills prophecy," he warned. "Fear draws disaster the way honey draws bees." But he also ordered non-Amish visitors to remove any weapons that tempt ill use. Reporters surrendered pocket knives. Deputies remained armed by necessity. We had 2 hours until 7 the next square. We had 2 hours until 7 the next square. If disaster was slated for some unknown time, we'd better fortify. MTs were summoned to stand by. One Amish widow offered to drape the quilt entirely and postpone reveals, but the bishop shook his head. Truth concealed grows stronger. So it remained, prophetic storyboard visible to all. At 7, Square 13 emerged. A chalice, simple wooden, sat on a table. The wine inside rippled crimson. Beside it, a single drop like blood hung mid-air. The symbol meant nothing to me, but Reuben went pale. "The chalice from Trinity Lutheran," he said. "Prized 18th century relic." The Lutheran church sat adjacent to Amish Farms, an ecumenical neighbor. We radioed the curate, who verified the chalice resting secure inside a locked display. Officers double-checked. No theft. By 8, twilight painted the sky mauve. Verse 14 showed a silhouette climbing a silo ladder under moonlight. Trespass. Maybe sabotage. Farmers kept vigil at every grain tower. The cycle became almost rote, until Square 15 at 9 p.m. depicted Chief Reuben himself, badge on chest, lying unconscious beneath a floating clock face set to 10:30. He exhaled an uneasy laugh. "Seems I'm scheduled for a nap." "But where?" I asked. "Clock tower in town hall chimes 10:30, he shrugged. "Let's stay here so it can't come true." We thought location alone might save him, but at 9:40, Reuben ducked to retrieve a dropped handkerchief. A candy apple vendor wheeled a cart backward. The handle clipped his temple. He slumped briefly before we propped him against a post, alive, woozy, but unconscious for maybe 5 seconds. The time? Exactly 9:42. The quilt had been general, but still landed its blow. As Reuben recovered, I began to dread the inevitability. The panels didn't require perfect fulfillment, they demanded symbolic echo. What then of the pavilion panic square waiting dead center? Lightning flickered in the western sky. Thunderheads drifted over the blue ridge, storm scheduled at midnight. Vendors lowered flaps. The auctioneer proposed adjourning until morning. The bishop reluctantly agreed. Yet people milled, hypnotized by the unfinished prophecy. 9 squares remained behind muslin. An unvoiced agreement held them. Leaving before the end felt dangerous. Square 16, unveiled by a quaking volunteer at 10, showed a tombstone cracked in half, the date chiseled. June 5, today, and the name Jonah Lapp. I suppressed a shiver. Jonah's house lay only a mile south. Reuben, back on his feet, said, "I need you to check on him. Better many witnesses than none." "Take deputies," I urged. He nodded, and 2 cruisers rolled into the night. I stayed. Someone must keep eyes on the quilt. Square 17 at 11 depicted the same tombstone intact, but flowers sprouted from its base. White trilliums, symbols of resurrection in Amish folklore. The crowd murmured confusion. Had the sequence reversed? Jonah's death? Did the second image nullify the first? At 11:30, Reuben radioed. "Jonah stable, no distress, but something odd. His hospice nurse is missing, blood on the floor." I relayed the message to the elders. Gas lamps cast uneasy shadows. Thunder grumbled nearer. Square 18 arrived at midnight. Lightning crashed, and fabric flashed. A nurse's cap lay beside a pair of scissors, both stitched scarlet. Reuben returned moments later, rain in his beard. The nurse, Norway, found her outside the house, gagged, wrists taped. Said an unknown woman subdued her and took Jonah, drugged him into a wheelchair, drove off in a white van. The pavilion trembled with communal fear. Who would abduct a sick Amish teen? And why predict it with embroidery? I grabbed binoculars and scanned the hill. Headlights bobbed through dark fields, heading toward the auction site. A white van breached the pasture fence and rattled to a stop near the pavilion. Before deputies could react, the side door slid open. A woman, in Mennonite garb, rolled Jonah, limp but conscious, down the ramp. She waved a cloth surrender-or flag. We couldn't tell. I sprinted forward. Rain plastered my suit. Thunder muffled voices. "Stop!" I yelled. She halted at the pavilion entrance, lifted her face into lamplight. I recognized Miriam Stoltzfus, Reuben's niece, the quiltmaker he'd sighted at dawn. Deputies encircled her, but she raised both hands. "I mean no harm." Reuben pushed through, eyes blazing. "Miriam, what is this evil?" She looked at him with grief, no fear. "Uncle, I tried to warn you the only way I could." Her words buckled my knees. "You made the quilt squares?" She nodded. "Each widow sewed one of the original ring, but I added the prophetic squares. With guidance?" "Guidance from whom?" Reuben whispered. "From Jonah." She touched his pale hand. "He's been dreaming these horrors for weeks, visions that start as symbols, then sharpen. He can't speak long, pain steals his breath, so he draws them and I stitch. We believed if we showed them publicly, people would act and prevent them." Jonah's eyelids fluttered. He managed a faint nod. "But why kidnap him?" I asked. "Because the final vision takes place here. He saw himself in this pavilion at the center of the quilt, and he saw a fire worse than Fisher's cabin." She pointed to the central square. "If he's here, maybe it changes the variables." My detective mind reeled. Prophecy had driven every step, including this abduction, a self-protective paradox. "We need to reveal the remaining squares," she said. "Only then can we finish this." The bishop conferred with law enforcement. Storm shutters rattled. At 12:30 they agreed. The quilt would be completed now, one after another. Storm and fear be damned. Square 19 showed a kerosene lantern shattering, flame curling toward drapery identical to the bunting overhead. Square 20 showed a man's hand mine gripping scissors, severing a tassel near the lantern. Square 21 displayed the pavilion roof, lightning splitting its central beam. Square 22, a bucker brigade, a murmur and English passing water hand to hand. Square 23, dawn light breaking through clouds onto a charred frame, but people standing unharmed. Square 24, the final patch already half attached, depicted the quilt itself. Circle complete, with a needle poised to take one last stitch, thread unknotted. Silence followed. Rain hissed beyond canvas. I stared at Square 20, my hand with scissors. It implied I must act before lantern flame caught bunting, before lightning felled the roof. I scanned. A dozen kerosene lanterns hung from hooks, swaying. Cloth bunting fluttered dangerously close. "Cut them down," I barked. Deputies moved. I grabbed scissors from a vendor's toolkit, exact replica of the embroidered image. I snipped bunting free and tossed it aside. Others followed suit, de-decorating the dais in frantic haste. Just then, lightning slammed the weather vane atop the pavilion, electrical cracks splitting wood support. The roof groaned. A beam detached. People screamed but fled outward, not inward, benches tripping underfoot. Outside, volunteers formed that bucket brigade predicted in Square 22, passing water from the pond as embers rained. The blaze began but found little cloth left to devour. Wet walls quenched sparks. In 15 minutes the storm snuffed its own fire. When dawn arrived, Square 23 fulfilled. The pavilion stood, smoke black but intact, the crowd exhausted yet alive. Someone approached Jonah's wheelchair. He clenched a pencil, scrawling shaky letters on scrap. Done. Miriam lifted him. He says the vision's ended. Wind cooled the smouldering timbers. The quilt, despite sparks, remained untouched, except the final square unattached. I picked up the dangling patch. "What now?" I asked Miriam. "Stitch it," Jonah whispered. First word I'd ever heard from him. Together we threaded needle through border, tying off the circle. As the knot tightened, a hush descended, like a book closing after the last page. The news called it miracle, madness, mass hysteria, and investigators sought rational explanations, weather patterns, faulty wiring, psychological suggestion. They found nothing to charge Miriam with beyond misdemeanor trespass, dropped when Jonah's parents testified to her pure intent. Weeks later, Jonah passed, his final days free of nightmares. Miriam mailed me a small envelope. Inside lay a single quilt square, an open pasture under clear skies, no people, no threat, only a sun rising over stitched hills. On the back, in neat pencil script, future unwritten. I framed it in my office. When storms rattle the windows and phones ring with fresh disasters, I glance at that calm fabric dawn. I remember a pavilion saved by scissors and faith, a quilt that told crimes before they lived, and a community that prevented them, stitch by frantic stitch. I know prophecy can bend, and so can we.